I'm just drafting an email for that.
See this?
Oh, Wade sent me the time he's gonna be canvassing with his team on Saturday, so I'm gonna send it over there.
Okay.
We'll get them.
Feedback, see, Baltimore,
I don't know, I really had mentioned it in the
they're
meeting.
asking when they're eating, it's gonna be posting some pictures.
Well, he just sent me an email, so maybe he'd be okay with talking.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
They're cuddling in. Sandy and Sandra cuddling with Michelle.
Great, I didn't.
You were about us.
I'm gonna hang here with you then.
Hello?
Yes,
So,
yeah, and maybe,
that's probably-
yeah, and that may just be that very well could just, but we can fix that. That was, my guess is, Susie just didn't click the right things because all the stuff's in there because they have access to it, so. But they're not members, so yeah, we'll take a look at that.
Hi, Bobby.
Hey,
Nice job. Welcome back.
thanks.
We'll have a wonderful trip.
Yeah.
You're exhausted, huh?
I'm exhausted, yeah.
Hey, while I have you, before I ask a question, are you going to the Hospice Tree of Life?
Oh, yeah.
And would you like to speak on behalf of the district, because the chair would like to
It's
defer to you?
Appreciate
your
that,
thing,
but-
Bobby, and so I wanted to make sure that you had first dibs in, first crack at it.
No, you do it. I'll be there. When is it again?
It's November 8th.
Yeah, and I'll be out of town.
Yeah, no, I think you should do it.
Okay.
Okay, I'm happy too, but I also wanted to.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Defer.
I just wanted to, yes, just. She had asked me to do that. and then-
No, it must be 8, because some.
It's the 8th. It's November 8th.
How was it? It was good. We had someone come here and go,
Like,
I'm here for the symposium. I go, oh, that's at the community center.
Yeah.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, it's Wednesday, November 8th. Great. Let me know.
Did you use the Metro card or did you use your
I
phone? or
did,
What'd you
I
do?
did. We actually, I loaded that one.
Mhm.
I ended up getting them one, like, I got everybody one so they could have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it was,
How do you-
I love the subway, and It's easy.
Great way to get.
Nicole's not a big bark person in general, and the one time I talked her into going on there recently, there was like an altercation between two people, and so she's like, never again. And I'm like, well, this is different. This is different.
Yeah.
We're in New York.
Yeah, so we were in Times Square, so we, you know, like rode the R down to Battery Park to take the ferry out to
Statue of Liberty.
Statue of Liberty. And that was enough for her. She was like, I'm good. I'm like, come on, let's ride it back. And then we
Uber
walked.
buddy.
Yeah, we ended up walking up to, you know, Wall Street, and then we walked over to the 9/11 memorial. And then we hopped in a cab on the way back. The girls fell asleep in the cab. We were averaging like 22,000 steps a day for
Yeah.
4 days.
Sounds good.
My back felt every bit of it when I got home. It's like, oh, I gotta
Did
start.
you go into the museum? as well?
We did not. It was a little, the girl.
It takes
wanted-
an all day thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we wanted the girls to go 7 and 11. When we took them to the morgue, we didn't realize Haley knew about 9/11. Ronnie had heard about it, but we had to, you know, have a little conversation.
Conversation about what that was, yeah.
I think they picked up the like the somber nature of just the site, and so
Of the-
that was
the
yeah,
Well done.
Size of the footprints. and,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Dinner.
No, we're like a library. You can't- you have to go on the Neil and Mitch. Neil, what is it? Neelis, near the Neelis niche.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Mitch would have been great too.
I apologize, I decided to wear a mask today for hanging out at my daughter's school. And I think 95% of kids have the sniffles or something.
Oh,
like that.
really?
So my daughter came home this afternoon because I was in her company class and she started coughing and go. Great, I was hanging out with the kids,
Yeah.
all you guys, you know, the whole morning, just in case I might have caught, I don't know if I did, but I feel fine, but my daughter started coughing, so.
Thank you.
I don't want to spread anything if I do catch anything. But don't blame
And who
me.
knows what happened at the conference, right? She's one of those.
One of the things, just for safety.
Mhm. That was the wine cave.
Oh, the record was fantastic. It was a lot of fun. They had, I guess, expanded, one of the fellows that we were there with, this fellow named Dr. Phil. Or, you know, he was referred to as Dr. Phil. I guess grew up with one of the family members from that winery. So he actually knew a lot of the history himself.
Sounds cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
that was a fun group. I spent some time with them last year. And yeah, they never had a party.
The Reuben sandwich.
What's
Did you get the Reuben?
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
It's part of like Gregory Gardens, they had a fundraiser tonight.
Oh, yeah.
So dine and donate type of thing.
Mm.
So I quickly went over there, but they were running late with sandwiches.
Yeah, they take they're new. They
Yeah, so they're
take
still
a
getting
little bit of time. They're getting
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, I just had their Reuben. It was good.
Yeah.
Did we win anything? We did not.
Didn't win anything.
Okay.
I even stayed for bingo too and.
Nothing, huh?
Nothing.
It just was
Nothing.
not our
It
day.
wasn't,
our
it wasn't
week.
happening. It's like, oh.
Yeah, same one last year.
Yeah.
Staff appreciated the baskets.
And the tequila.
And- Okay, I'm gonna hit record so I don't forget, so.
Got home just fine, and I got to ride in Sandy's T-Bird.
Mm.
Smooth. It was really a smooth ride.
Wow.
Think about it. Yeah, I mean, you're just not off the ground.
Yeah.
Maybe that makes the difference. I'm in a car that low in a long time. But it's a nice ride. Yeah.
Any traffic on the way back?
Oh, yeah.
Too, that-
Yeah,
oh,
like
good.
37, but other than that, it was fine.
Yeah, 37.
Yeah, for me, it was like clear sailing because we left midday, on Wednesday.
Oh, right, yeah.
I pulled into the Amy's drive-through, that vegetarian drive-through place.
Oh, yeah, in San Jose.
And it's the only one with the
Yeah.
drive-through. It was really
Really good.
cool. The food was good, but the building was actually spectacular because it had like a living roof, all the water is
Wow.
recycled.
Is this a destination? Is Amy's drive-through?
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
I hadn't heard of it before.
Cause Amy.
Is it the Amy soups and?
Oh,
Yeah, they make the frozen
Yeah,
vegetarian
yeah.
stuff, but they opened up a number of different restaurants, and this was the only one that has a drive-through, so I wanted to experience the drive-through, but. The building itself was actually like had environmental consciousness on their mind when they built it, so. It's actually quite impressive, so I told my wife and she's gonna go try to visit it. 'Cause
Is it from Santa Rosa?
yeah, it's like, yeah, really impressed, like taking pictures of it.
It's like going to Randy's Donuts in LA, and well,
Yeah.
what used to be Randy's Donuts. All right, it is 7 o'clock. I'm gonna get my agenda back on the screen here. We call to order the regular meeting of the Board of Directors of the Pleasant Hill Recreation Park District. It is Thursday, October 26th, 2023. Public comments will be taken in person. Members of the public are welcome to view our meetings on our YouTube feed, and we also have Zoom or just YouTube?
Nope, just YouTube.
Okay, so written comments could have been presented. We'll hear in a little bit if any were. But that is the process that we're going to be using this evening in terms of public comment. Let the record show that all members of the Board of Directors are present, and Queen, would you lead us in the pledge of allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Item number 3 is public comment. This is the portion of our meeting where members of the public are invited to make comments to the Board of Directors on any subject not on our agenda this evening. Any members of the public willing or interested in speaking to the Board of Directors this evening? Seeing none, Susie, do we, I guess it would just be a matter of, did we receive any written comment?
We did not.
Did not? Okay, good. We'll close public comment and move to item number 4, reports and presentations. And we'll start with Lila Nikolic. Hello.
Hi. Teen Center After School Program and staff recognized Unity Day on Wednesday, October 18th by having a community celebration talking about the effects of bullying and how it affects everyone. And they took an online pledge to support others who have been hurt or harmed by bullying. Treat others with kindness, be accepting of people's differences, and help include those who are left out. Over 80,000 people from all over the world took this online pledge, which was a good reason to show, or was a good way to show Teen Center participants that Unity Day was happening all over the world. Teen Center also held their Red Ribbon Week educational component at the after school program on Wednesday, October 25th. A video was shown to participants about fentanyl, its dangers, and the staff led a group discussion on peer pressure. Tomorrow, participants are sharing photos and demonstrations of them doing their hobbies. Teen Council is holding position elections at our November 6th meeting. We are excited to help at Haunted Trail, the Holiday Festival, and Breakfast with Santa. As you know, College Park had their homecoming, which went very well. The rally and the dances were very fun, decorated very well, and no fights broke out.
Is that noteworthy?
It is.
However, the football team unfortunately lost the homecoming game to Los Lomas and lost to Northgate this past Friday, but the game was super close with our team leading until the end of the 4th quarter. The pink fire truck was there for breast cancer fighters and survivors, which was awesome. The cheer team had great performances at the rally in both games. Tomorrow night, the team is playing Benicia, and next Friday is their senior night against Alhambra. Girls golf has won league champions, or girls golf was league champions at the DAL championships, and Tori Policino won DAL MVP. The girls flag football team is ranked 3rd in the league with a 10-4 win-loss ratio. They have a tournament this weekend, which will hopefully lead them to win the following weekend. Both water polo teams had their senior nights on Monday. The girls team is 3rd in the league and the boys team is 1st in the league. The girls volleyball and tennis teams have finished their seasons and put up a great fight. The school choir performed the national anthem at the homecoming game and had their Bella Notte performance this past Saturday. It was held at St. Andrew's Church where they served pasta and sang Italian songs. This event raised money for their program. The school band has been performing at every home football game and has a musicians showcase this Saturday. Last but not least, the drama program is putting on a performance tonight and tomorrow night of Twisted Tales of Terror. It is being held in the school cafeteria from 7 to 9 both nights. Thank you so much. Any questions?
Wow, that was a
report.
very
Yeah,
upbeat, yeah, nicely done.
Thank you.
Nicely done. Questions or comments?
No, I'm just really excited about the flag football, to see how well it's done. This is the first year. And to see that they've got, championship and the opportunity to,
Mhm.
go in for the following weekend after that. It's pretty cool to see how well that's done.
Yeah, they only have 3 seniors.
All right, so they've got still like a lot of runway for the rest of
That's
the
right.
players and stuff for
That's right.
coming seasons.
Lila, did I read something about a robotics teacher at College Park winning an award? Or was that maybe not?
Oh, Mr.
College Park?
Bland?
I don't know. I didn't see the name. I thought it was College Park Robotics and I won quite an impressive award. Anyway, maybe
I will look
just a
into
question
that.
to look into that.
I will.
Yeah, yeah. Did you sing at any of these events?
Yes, I
Yeah.
sang at, I did sing at both. I did the national anthem and I sang at Bella Notte.
Oh, nice.
Very nice. Good. Well, we used to have an ex officio who wrote and read poetry,
Really?
and she was quite good. She was at awards for her recitals. So before next May,
Yeah.
maybe you can invite some of your buddies with you, and you can maybe show us a little bit about. how to do that.
Well, maybe instead of, stating the pledge, we'll sing the national anthem or something,
Lovely.
No
idea.
pressure.
This will be her last meeting.
It was just a suggestion. It's not in the job description. Yes.
I just have one comment. It's delightful to have the ad hoc position back. And certainly the first time you were here and then this week, just all the activities that are going on and finding out more about, what's happening. It's been great. So thank you very much.
Yes, and I love the emphasis, not just on sports and on pajama days and things like that, but also the graver things that you're
Right.
talking about,
Yeah.
the things that are weighty about fentanyl and, learning about, Red Ribbon Week and things like that.
Yeah, we work for support.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much for being as broadly reporting as you are. Yeah, really appreciate it. All right.
Especially about the greatest high school in the history.
And that would be. All right. I had to give you the one. Well, thank you. You're welcome to stay. By the
stay for
way,
the
tomorrow
delivery.
isn't tomorrow Haunted Trail?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
there were a lot of things that are kind of competing with Haunted Trail.
The drama and,
Oh.
Conrail and everything else, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Team Council and the Teen Center for, being engaged in that for us. I appreciate it. All right. Good. All right. Let's see. 4.2 is a report from our general manager. Michelle.
Yes, I have a written report. I'm gonna highlight a couple of things. One, I just wanted to acknowledge that we have eliminated access for the public to view via for the public to comment via Zoom. As most of you probably know, we had done that preemptively. The city of Pleasant Hill had to deal with a very unpleasant situation with hate speech at their meeting. And so I wanted to just acknowledge, the board's support and us preemptively trying to make sure that we didn't have to provide a forum for hate speech and that we stood against that. So I just wanted to remind everybody who's watching that the board and the district stands united against hate, and that it is a tenet in our recently adopted DEI strategic plan. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
The board appreciates your tying that to our policy. So thank you for the affirmative look in.
And then on a happier note, I wanted to make sure that the board knew that we are having our last community listening session regarding improving our green spaces on Monday. I have Secretary Tran and Director Wurst planned to be at that meeting for the board. And so that will be the last of the scheduled sessions. I will then provide a summary of each of those for the full board so that everyone knows what transpired and what comments were received during those sessions. So that is exciting. They have been very engaging. It's been great for me to engage with not only people who have been engaged on these topics for a while, but also a lot of residents who haven't been engaged in these topics. We've seen a lot of newer residents as well. So that is excellent. As Chair Bernardo said, and Lila said, Haunted Trail is tomorrow night from 6 to 8 here at the park. It should be a really fun time with lots and lots of candy given out and use of the entire park. So we're super excited about that. So hopefully you can come out. And then in addition to that, which isn't in the report, but we also have a special recreation dance at the same time in the senior center. So if you're here and you come to the Haunted Trail, that starts at 7 and goes from like 7 to 10, 7 to 9. I would hop over there into the senior center and just check out the special recreation dance. So it's always a fun time for the participants who dress up and they really enjoy that. So it should be fun. So if you've never experienced one of our special recreation dances, definitely pop in and see how that is going. And then the Hospice Tree of Lights. So on November 8th, it's hosted at this big oak tree right out here. So hopefully we will see you for that. But with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions from Michelle?
Well, I just have one. I saw, there was a posting for the new marketing coordinator position. Any updates as far as applications and?
Yeah, we are in the hiring process.
Oh, in the hiring process.
And once we have someone who starts, we will bring them through to introduce them. So.
Any other questions or comments?
Just wanted to thank Michelle for being so strong and dedicated and ensuring that our meetings are free from hate. I sort of messaged Michelle after the Pleasant Hill council meeting, and many of us either were there, were watching it, or have heard about it. And so experiencing that as it happened was not a pleasant experience. And I think we can all acknowledge that people do have a right to free speech. And at the same time, though, we really can't tolerate hate because that just excludes people or makes people feel unwelcome to attend these types of meetings. So you want to make sure that everybody who wants to attend can attend in a place that's a safe place to be at. So committing ourselves to the DEI policy and ensuring that not only people have a place to say something, if they want to say something, they can certainly come here. But that kind of speech is not done in a way that excludes people. So thank you, Michelle, for jumping on that right away. Appreciate it.
And I'll jump on that as well. Thank you for engaging our council as well to help us kind of find the right balance between the First Amendment rights that people have and the needs that we have to respect all of us and announce our feelings about hate speech. It's not tolerated here. Okay, Lila, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, any other questions or comments? If not, we'll move on. Okay, let's move on to action items. Good talk. Oh, I'm sorry, consent calendar, yes. 5.1 is to approve bills to be paid for the warrants. Can we take the consent calendar as a lump here or take them separately? Michelle?
You can take them as a lump. I just want to note there is an error, and I'm sure most of you have seen it in the regular meeting minutes. Including on the minutes, it includes staff in present. We need to remove that. So we will strike those and just fix that. I'm not sure. It didn't come in any of the other votes or anything, but it did come in that. So it's odd, but we'll fix that. So, but then with that correction, you can take them together.
Okay. Any questions, comments on the consent calendar? Okay, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
A motion to approve the consent calendar.
Okay, any second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, please. We moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar. All in favor?
Aye.
Susie, 5-0. And Now, item 6, action item. 6.1 is a report from True North Research. Wait a minute. Is that up here? Regarding voter opinion survey results and discussion. Okay, discussion.
One discussion.
All right, this would be a very interesting discussion, I believe. Michelle, we'll start with you.
Yeah, let's start with me. So this evening, Larry, can you join us? And I don't know if Melissa wants to join you. We have two tables or two. So Larry, you can
I want
sit
to
there.
one of these.
So, yeah, pick one of the new fancy chairs. So, so Larry Trematola, who is our consultant, helping us with the voter education side of this process. I have Timothy McLarney of True North Research. He is actually on Zoom, and so Timothy and his firm did the voter opinion survey. So he's going to walk us through that. But first, I also have here, in case you want to take notes, I printed out the survey, or I printed out his presentation. So, so this is the presentation Tim's going to go through. If anybody wants copies, but I'm, there's not really a lot for me to say. This is going to be Tim's show. Because he's the one with all the information and knowledge. And so, so Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you. I gave you permission to share.
Great. Thank you, Michelle, and good evening, everyone. Let me share my screen. Everybody got that? Should kind of look like the front page of your handouts.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm Dr. Tim McLarney. I'm president of True North Research. We're a firm that over the last 20 years has specialized in working with public agencies and using surveys to develop a statistically reliable understanding of the communities they serve. To date, my firm, basically my business partner and I have worked on over 1,200 research studies for public agencies, and about half of the work that we do these days is what we call revenue measure feasibility studies, like we're going to be talking about here tonight, where the goal is to understand if it's feasible to move forward with some type of revenue measure, and if it is feasible, to use the survey to help guide all the important decisions that you as a board would have to make in preparing a package to then ultimately be decided by your voters. To date, we've had a lot of success. We've helped our clients raise about $35 billion at the local level around the state over the years. In 6 of the last 8 election cycles for measures that we've recommended to go to ballot, we've been 100% successful overall. We've got about a 95% success rate. And I mention this mainly because as I go through tonight's presentation, and perhaps in answering questions from the board, I may make reference to how the results we're seeing here compared to what we might typically see for other agencies have gone forward with other measures. And I just want you to have a sense for the experience base from which I'd be speaking. I also welcome questions from the board as I go or at the end, whichever is your preference. Okay, so next slide, which should be the purpose of the study. Before we talk about the results, helpful to take a quick moment to review the purpose of the study or why we went about doing this research, as well as the methodology that we used. So in terms of the purpose of the study, as a revenue measure feasibility study related to a bond, we're really trying to address the 3 bullets you see here. The first is just determine if a bond measure is feasible. And what I mean by that is if you as a board were to choose to move forward and place a measure on the ballot, does it have a reasonable chance of success? Answer that question isn't always yes. Sometimes we do this research and we get the numbers back and there's really no way to sort of clear path to get you from where you are today to where you need to be viable on election day. And if that's the sort of results of the survey, I'll be the first person to tell you that. I mean, I don't think that the board or the administration or the community wants to invest the effort in this kind of a process that it takes to be successful if from the outset you really don't have a reasonable chance. When we do see that there's a path to a potential winning measure, that second bullet kicks in, which is trying just to use the survey to help us determine what's the best way to package this measure in a way that it's consistent with the type of measure your community is interested in supporting. Lots of components to a bond proposal. There's the bond amount and the underlying tax rate, sort of collectively, you can think of that as the price tag. There's the types of services and projects and improvements that can be funded by a measure. You have an idea of how you'd like to spend the money. Voters probably have their ideas about how they'd prefer to have the money spent. And we want to see, kind of where we can align those two. There's also questions of election timing. There's questions of accountability provisions that may be built into the measure. So all of these, again, important decisions that you would have to make if you were to move forward with a measure, the survey can help guide. And then the final bullet's an important one, which is related to using the survey to sort of understand the role that information plays in shaping voters' opinions about your proposal, and also to help guide future communications. I'm a firm believer that if a public agency is going to take the step of putting a measure on the ballot and asking voters to make this decision, it's really incumbent upon that agency to educate voters about the decision you're asking them to make, right? You're not using public dollars to advocate up or down. You're just using your communications to give voters neutral, non-advocacy information that helps them come to an informed decision. So in terms of the methodology, next slide. And when you're doing revenue measure research, one of the important questions you have to address is, how do we select the people we're going to select to take the survey? So you always want to think in terms of the elections that your measure could be on the ballot. There's sort of three alternatives that we considered. There's that high turnout November 2024 election environment next November when the president's going to be on the ballot. Nested within that group, there's that primary electorate in March, right? Smaller group of voters. They're not only going to turn out in November, they're also going to turn out in March. And then you have sort of a separate subset of voters that are what we call special election voters. They would actually turn out if you were to choose to move forward with some type of special election. We looked at all three of those universes, and then we use a process called stratified and clustered random sampling to pick a sample of voters that's representative of that likely voter universe on all the dimensions that we know are related to voting behavior. So things like age, things like gender, things like partisanship naturally. And we also pay a lot of attention to household party type. That is the single best predictor of how someone's going to vote on tax measure, right? If I know somebody's a Democrat, that tells me a little something about how they're likely to vote on tax measure. If I know that person lives with another Democrat, so two Democrats in the same household, that tells me more. Actually, it's that household dynamic that really shapes how voters behave on these types of measures, such that if you share the partisanship, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, of the people that you live with, it tends to reinforce your tendencies and you become sort of super partisans, right? So dual Democratic households are your most liberal voters. Dual Republican households are your most conservative voters typically. If you live in a mixed household, God help you, right? You argue about politics, and the act of arguing about politics has a way of moderating your behavior when it comes to these types of measures. So we pay attention to all of those variables in pulling our sample. Once we have our sample pulled, we reach out by email, text, and telephone. Everything's pin protected. Left hand knows what the right hand's doing, and that ensures that only those people that take this survey are able to, or that are invited to take the survey are able to access it. They're only able to take it one time only. Once they're in, they can choose to participate by phone or online, whichever they prefer. And I think we went out to go for 400 interviews, if I remember correctly, walking back in the door with 530. So we overshot on sample. That was because we have to make some estimates about what we think the productivity is going to be. I tend to be a little conservative in that. And in the end, we were able to over deliver by about 130 interviews, no extra charge to the district for that. And because we have 530 randomly selected likely voters and not a census of all of your likely voters, we have what's known as a margin of error due to sampling. In this case, that's plus or minus 4.2%. What that means is we can be 95% confident that the results we'll talk about tonight are within 4.2% of what we would have found had we spoken with all of your likely voters. Okay, so on to the results. Next slide, importance of issues. At the outset of the interview, we engage in what we call our importance of issues question, where for each of the issues you see there on the left side of that slide, we simply ask voters to tell us how important is this to you. Is it extremely important, very important, somewhat important, and not all important? We ask this really for two reasons. One is it's a nice warm-up question, just kind of gets voters into the groove of taking the survey, makes good on that promise that this was going to be a survey about local issues. We got right to that in the first question. But it is also an opportunity for us to sort of take a 30,000-foot snapshot of how your voters care about various issues, some of which compete for tax dollars. And in particular, how does this issue of repairing and maintaining local parks and recreation facilities, which is what you're trying to fund with a bond, how does that stack up against some of these other issues that also compete for tax dollars? And in particular, how does that issue stack up against preventing local tax increases? rough rule of thumb makes a lot of sense. The more importance they assign to the thing you're trying to fund with your measure relative to preventing local tax increases, the better positioned you are to move forward with some type of revenue measure. The more that preventing local tax increases is seen as sort of equally important as what it is you're trying to fund, that usually means you got a pretty steep hill to climb to be successful on election day. So you can see here that number one issue was improving the quality of education in local public schools. Not a surprise. That's usually, it's a sort of a favorite from voters traditionally. 84% saying extremely very important. But as you go down to number 4, kind of right in the middle, you see repairing and maintaining local parks and recreation facilities at 78%. All the way down at the bottom, preventing local tax increases, 49%. So you have a 29% gap between those two items. That is a good gap. When we have been, we do a ton of bonds around the state, mostly for schools. And what we have generally seen is that if you can get a gap of say 22, 25, that's pretty typical between what you're trying to fund and preventing local tax increases. Here, we've got a somewhat larger gap, and we're not even talking about schools, we're talking about parks and rec. So that's a good sign, right? If I knew nothing else about the results, I'd look at that number and say, okay, we may have feasibility here. Okay, next slide is the initial ballot test. So after that warm-up question, we get right down to business with what we call the initial ballot test. And the idea here is, before we get any deeper into the interview, start talking about possible tax rates, elaborating on the types of projects that could be funded, and presenting arguments pro and con. We want to present a mock-up of what we think that 75-word ballot statement could look like and get their reaction. It's a really good gauge of where your voters are at on the natural with respect to this proposal, because this is all they've seen. Shown here is a 75-word statement. You can see when we're doing these types of bond studies, you always want to put in the ballot language kind of the highest package you think you might go out for in terms of price tag, right? So, if we thought sort of a 3 cent per $100 of assessed valuation rate's probably as high as you would want to push that. That translates into a $98 million bond. You'll see in a couple slides we can step down off that, but you always want to test kind of the highest at the ballot test, because you can work down from there, but you can't work up from there. So that's the language we chose, and here are the results. So at that initial ballot test, you had 66% of likely November voters say that they would support this proposal. You had 23% opposed. You have about 11% who were unsure. So in the state of California, currently, for a bond like this, because you're not a school district, which can go at 55%, you're a special district, you need 2/3 to be successful. So you are sitting just a hair under that at 66% at the initial ballot test. So naturally, support for these types of measures can depend on the price tag. The more expensive it is in terms of a tax rate, all other things being equal, the less likely a voter tends to be to support it. So in the space of the poll, after that initial ballot test, we jump into our tax threshold section. And the point here is to make it really clear, bonds mean taxes, just in case they didn't catch that. And to also kind of focus their attention on the price tag to get understanding how, as you alter that potential tax rate, that may impact voter support for your proposal. So we do that by testing first that high $30 per 100,000 assessed valuation tax rate. We say, if you knew that this measure would increase the property taxes on your home by $30 per 100,000 assessed valuation, would you vote yes or no? And then if they're anything but a definitely yes at that number, we go to $20. And so that start high, go low, that's called a Dutch auction. That's the best way to figure out sort of the threshold that people are comfortable with in terms of price tag. And what you can see here is that we get a fair amount of sensitivity at that tax rate. At $30 per 100,000, we're at 49%. At $20, we're at 58%. Now, we know from doing a ton of research on bonds over the years that this is a very conservative read on voters' willingness to support your proposal for 2 reasons. Number one, we are putting the blinders on folks and focusing their attention on the price tag. Anytime you do that, irrespective of sort of not talking about all the goodies that come along with it, just talking about the price tag, that tends to generate a conservative read on their willingness to support your proposal. The other reason why we know this is a bit of a conservative read is because when I say the property taxes on your home are going to increase by $30 per 100,000 assessed valuation, it requires that you know what AV is, you have some estimate of the AV for your property, and you can do math in your head pretty quickly in the space of a survey to roll that up to a meaningful number. Not everybody is good at that, understandably. And because of that, we know that there's a certain percentage of people in this slide that are hedging. They're saying, no, we're not sure, rather than yes, because they know you're talking about price. They just don't know what it means. So we also come about it a different way on the next slide. We say, all right, this is the left column. Let me put it another way. If you knew that this measure would cost the typical homeowner in the district $165 per year, would you vote yes or no? $165 per year is that $30 per 100,000 assessed valuation tax rate multiplied times the median AV for a residential property in your district. So it's what that median property owner would pay. And you can see that when we do the math for them, you get a somewhat better answer, right? We saw on the prior slide, at $30 per 100,000 of assessed valuation, we had 49% who were willing to support. When they translate that to $165 per year, support jumps up about 9 points. You're now at 58%. Same exercise on the right column, only here we're annualizing the $20 per 100,000 assessed valuation tax rate for the median homeowner. That rolls up to $110 per year. And at $110 per year, we had 65% support for this proposal. So all of this is information that kind of helps us in sort of making some recommendations about where ultimately that price tag should be, right? It tends to be one of the tougher decisions that you have to make related to a bond, because obviously the higher the price tag, the more revenue you're able to capture, the more good you can do in terms of your facilities. But the higher the price tag, you also take on more risk that you're of not achieving the 2/3 on election day. So now from there we go to projects improvements. Here is where we're trying to do two things. One is we're now going to start to educate this respondent more about what your proposed bond would accomplish. In that initial 75 words, we only had maybe 40 of those words to be able to describe what this measure would do. Here we get to unpack it into all these different projects and give them a better idea of the proposal. The other thing it allows us to do is to understand of all the ways you are considering spending the money, how do voters feel about those options? And are there any options on here that aren't all that popular? Meaning some voters don't see the merit of the project. They're not enthused about raising their taxes to accomplish it. And it could in some ways serve as an anchor if you put it in your project list moving forward, meaning an anchor on election day and kind of hurt your chances rather than help you. This is an interesting slide because there's a lot of slope to this line, right? We don't often see this much slope. And what I mean by the slope is you have some projects that are very popular and you have some projects that aren't very popular. So at the top of the list, you see the things that voters care the most about are renovating older parks and recreation facilities to bring them up to date, improving the network of walking, hiking, and biking trails. That was, arguably your number one when you look at the intensity of how many percentage of people say strongly favor. Upgrading children's playground equipment so it meets current health and safety standards, adding accessible bathrooms in heavily used parks, and improving access to parks and recreation facilities for those with special needs and disabilities. You go down towards the bottom of the list, you've got some projects here that I understand are, some folks are passionate about, some folks are not. Renovating the old schoolhouse building, you have less than 40% of voters who favor spending some of the money on that. Building a new multi-purpose gymnasium, that checked in south of a majority as well, along with installing splash pads and water play zones that are accessible for all. So those were projects that weren't quite as popular. Now, if you as a board choose to place a measure on the ballot, there's going to be an election cycle. During that election cycle, there's going to be a lot of discussion and debate in the community about your proposal. You're going to have folks who will step up and advocate on behalf of this measure, telling all their friends and neighbors about why it's needed and why they should vote yes. You may also get some opposition. Folks who step up say it's a terrible idea, not a good time, we shouldn't be doing this, here's why. For this survey to be a reliable gauge of the feasibility of your revenue measure, we need to be able to simulate that discussion and debate that's going to occur during the election cycle in the space of the poll, so that we have an understanding not only where your voters are today, which was, and on the natural, which was that initial ballot test, but what happens to their support for your measure once they've heard arguments both pro and con. And so shown here are the positive arguments we tested. The nature of the question is supporters of the measure say blank, you insert a positive argument. Do you think this is a very convincing, somewhat convincing, or not at all convincing reason to support the measure? And at the top of the list, you see what we call accountability arguments, right? These are, the first one is all the money stays local, right? To improve parks and rec facilities in the community. It cannot be taken away by the state or used for other purposes. Second one talks about, a transparent system of accountability, including a project list detailing how the money is going to be spent, citizens oversight committee, public disclosure of how all funds are spent. These two arguments tend to appeal to your more conservative voters, right? There's a certain percentage of voters out there who've been taught not to trust government. And so they want to see these types of accountability provisions built into a revenue measure before they're comfortable sort of saying, yes, I may be pro park and rec, but I'm not so, I'm not so comfortable with government and spending and wastefulness, et cetera. And so I want to make sure that if I vote yes on this, there's some guarantees that this money is going to be spent the way they say it's going to be spent. So those are the positive arguments that we test. You can see, quite a few of them get traction. So now at this point in the poll, voters have heard a lot more about your proposal than they did initially. We talked in detail about the possible tax rates. As we saw, that's a bit of a wet blanket on support for a proposal anytime you're focusing on the dollars and cents, and it brought us down. But we had a chance after that to talk in more detail about the types of projects that could be funded. We conveyed positive arguments. And so the question is, where are we now, right? So we go to the interim ballot test. Here's where we convey that same 75-word ballot statement. We say, now that you've heard a bit more, where do you stand? And you can see we tick up a point. So what this really is it looks really stable, right? 66 at the beginning, 67 here. It's really a U. We were 66 at the beginning. We talked about the taxes. Support went down. We talked about tax rates, but we've now built back up out of that hole as voters learned more about how the money could be spent, as well as arguments on behalf of the proposal. Then you get to the negatives. The idea behind the negatives here is we are going to simulate what voters would hear should you get opposition during an election cycle. And so what we do is we pepper them with a series of negative arguments that are designed to get them to vote no, and expose them to these arguments to get an understanding of how much impact these might have. You can see a number of the arguments get some traction. The number one here is pretty much the number one negative in 2/3 of the measures I've been testing this entire cycle. And it's just this idea that now's a horrible time to be thinking about raising taxes, right? We just came out of the pandemic. We've got runaway inflation. We've got high gas prices. People are struggling. Now's a terrible time. By the way, that's an argument that can be pretty much applied in any election at any time. You can always come up with a handful of reasons for why this is a terrible time to be raising taxes, right? And you see that argument a lot, but it is your number one here. The real question, though, is what happens afterwards. And that is here. After we pepper them with these negatives, it's cool support down to about 61% support. So we drop about 6 points. We're now sitting about 6 points south of that 2/3 threshold. All right, couple more slides here. So what does all this mean? I'm going to circle back to that overarching question I mentioned at the outset as to why it is we do this research, which is to understand if it's feasible to move forward with the measure. If you as a board choose to put a measure on the ballot, does it have a reasonable chance of success? The answer to that, I think, is yes, but under the right circumstances, right? These aren't the kind of numbers that suggest there's a path forward, but it's a narrow path, and you're going to need to sort of navigate it correctly to be successful. These aren't the kind of numbers that say you can throw up a bond measure on the ballot, say a few nice things about it, walk away, and expect to win. So why do I say it's feasible? Why do I say there's a path? Well, that's all the bullets you see there under the positive sign. We saw that, when you looked at the results, voters rated repairing and maintaining local streets and local parks and recreation facilities really in that top sort of group of issues that we normally see at the top. So questions about improving public safety, right? It was sort of right up in there in that mix. And that's one thing that's we like to see. When they saw the 75 words for the first time, no other context, we had almost 2/3 at that point say they would support it, 66%. So naturally there's kind of a nice reaction to the proposal. The projects and improvements that you're considering funding with the measure, we saw that there were a cluster of them that test very well. You've got some things in there that you probably don't want to put in your project list, but there's definitely a nice cluster of projects that your voters are attracted to. The positive arguments resonated, and support actually hits 2/3 in the poll in the absence of opposition. So those are all positive signs. Those are all the things that I see as indicators that there's a path forward. Now, the poll also calls our attention to some challenges that are worth also keeping in mind. One is tax rate sensitivity. We've already talked about that. When you zero in on these tax rates, there's some of the tax rates there, especially when you convey it as a rate per 100,000 AV, which not everybody understands what that means. We saw some fall off in support. We did also see some receptiveness to opposition arguments, right? So if you were to get opposition, it just makes this a little bit of a tougher climb than it would otherwise be. We also saw that these high propensity voters, these are voters, for example, who would not only show up in November, they're going to show up in the March primary. They are about 4 to 5% less supportive. So that plays into some recommendations we have about election timing. And then finally, we're a year away. If you were to choose to put a measure on the ballot in November, for example, we're a year away. And a lot can happen in a year. I mean, if there's one thing the last 3 years have taught me, anything can happen in the next year, right? I mean, if aliens land tomorrow, I probably wouldn't be that surprised, right? And so when you talk about a measure, putting something on the ballot, you sort of have to prepare to look, it may not be sunny skies and tailwinds on election day. It could be a little stormy. We want to make sure we put something up there that has the ability to sort of survive that. And then finally, the one thing we do know about next year is it's going to be a rough electoral climate. It's going to be hyper partisan. There's going to be some other statewide initiatives that could, create some crosswinds. So, I'm just pointing this out, not because these things are insurmountable, but we need to think about them and keep them in mind because they do form the backdrop and sort of the environment in which your measure would be landing. Okay, so with that in mind, a couple thoughts. First thing I want to emphasize is anytime you're doing a poll like this, it is not a crystal ball looking forward to election day saying you're going to get 63% on election day or 66% on election day. It's a snapshot in time. And if you design them really well, it tells you where you are today. And it also gives you a sense of how voters are likely to react to the information that they can encounter during an election cycle. But ultimately, what happens on election day isn't what your poll says today, determined by that. It's determined by everything that happens from this point forward, right? So it's really important that you make smart decisions about what this measure looks like that you're putting in front of your voters, so it's well aligned with the type of measure they've indicated they're interested in supporting. And you got to put the work in terms of communications. So on that note, a couple thoughts. Tax rate. Not ready to sort of make a recommendation on this right now. You're a ways away from having to make that decision, but clearly there's some tax rate sensitivity. So we're going to want to make sure we keep it in the comfort zone of about 2/3 of your voters, right? So I just have that as keep affordable. Project priorities, those are the things that are listed there. We're top of the list. There's probably an opportunity to reconfigure your 75-word ballot statement a little bit to address some of these things a little more clearly. So for example, the trail network is your number one project. It gets really short reference in the 75 words. And so again, some sort of reordering of that could make sense. One of the things that's also out there, you've probably heard about that could be a bit of a game changer, emphasis on could, is ACA 1. This is a constitutional amendment that will appear on the November ballot. It was passed by both chambers of the legislature and signed by the governor. What it essentially does is it makes it easier to pass these types of bond measures and possible special tax measures. So right now, you and other public agencies, with the exception of schools and community colleges, if you want to pass a bond, it has to go at 2/3. You don't see a lot of those around the state right now. And so they've made it harder to pass bonds recently in terms of the language that they're using. Like you now have to say the annual levy, you have to say the tax rate, you have to say the duration. You didn't have to do that about 5 years ago and before. So now you do. So, and that's had this sort of, it's made it more challenging to pass bonds. Well, this amendment would essentially give you the same rules that school districts have for their bonds. So you could pass a bond measure at 55% instead of 2/3. That's a potential game changer. If passed by voters in November of this next year, it would apply to all measures on the November ballot and measures moving forward. So with that in mind, and also keeping in mind that those high propensity voters that were showing up in March were a bit softer in their support, I think you've got a couple of election sort of scenarios that you could consider. One is the November 2024 ballot. You might share that ballot with ACA 1, and you either have to hit 2/3, assuming ACA 1 loses, or if you hit 55 or better and ACA wins, then you're successful. So that's one strategy. Different environment. You're going to be, it's going to be a bit of a circus just because of everything that's going to be on that ballot, but high turnout tends to help. The second one would be a special election, right? So get away from the noise and the circus of November, do something that is, you're the only thing on the ballot, and run it that way. And so I know Larry probably has more thoughts on those options. So and if you have questions, we can dig into that. And then finally, whatever election environment you choose, communication is going to be a big part of this, right? It's important that you as a public agency give voters the information they need to make a well-informed decision about this. And then ultimately, there would need to be a private independent campaign that could sort of carry the ball forward after the board votes to place the measure on the ballot and the district really sort of needs to step back. That campaign can pick up the ball and run it forward during that 88-day election cycle. So I have talked fast and furious. I will take a drink of water and I welcome any questions there may be from the board.
Thank you, Tim, very much. It was an awesome summary of all the details here. I appreciate recommendations that I didn't see in the earlier material as well. So I think that gives us a great place to start a conversation here. Michelle, I'm thinking that the kinds of questions we probably have are either for Tim or for Larry. You just kind of want to
Either one, yep, you can ask questions.
Here or not?
Yeah, you can ask questions and I will direct traffic or let either one of them, either one of them jump in, but yes,
Okay.
All questions will most likely go to the two of them.
Okay, all right. Well, there's a lot in front of us right now. This is obviously very, very important stuff, and we're not making any decisions this evening or reaching any consensus or anything like that. This is an informational opportunity, but it does, I think, help us form what will later be a decision. Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs up when, that kind of thing. So this is very foundational, I think, for us to have the opportunity to talk with our consultants about certain feasibility, and then also maybe about flexibility about what we think. So thoughts, questions?
Maybe I should start. Tim wouldn't say this publicly, he would say it privately, that he is, I think, the best in the state for doing this. And maybe he would say it publicly, I don't know, but he clearly is. And you will also, you will get a much more detailed report with cost tabs and a lot more detailed information as it's coming. So there's a lot of way to tear this information apart. And so I think he always provides some insightful stuff. And I'll also say that while I've worked with Tim in many, many projects over the years, we don't always agree. And I think that's helpful because we try to come up with the best solution with differing perspectives on this. And I think this is, this poll is given the fact there has been a lot of communication to the public, I think is one of the more interesting polls that I've seen in a long time. And I think it will serve us well for this period of time between now and when you make a decision on what to do. Things that draw my attention first are tax sensitivity.
Nice.
It's not unique to this district, but it is clearly that comes up here. And so that relates to projects. And there's also some clarity on projects. And I think some of the work that we have to do over the next period of time, weeks, days, is to recommend to you And I don't know if that's the right way to do it, to work with you on developing a project plan that is sensitive to taxpayers, so that you can look at that. Clearly, we can't do everything that you would want to do. But there's a lot that we can do. I believe when I look at polling information, it's like, is it a red light? Is it a green light? You know, where is it? And I do believe we have a green light, but there's some caution here. We can't get too in front of our skis. We've got to be smart in what we do, and the projects as well. And so I think we need to work that up to see what is affordable. The other thing, and I think this is where Tim and I may diverge opinion on, is election cycles. Clearly, the special election is a more conservative electorate, but it also is a much more manageable electorate in terms of being able to communicate to people than the November election would be, that we have no idea what that's going to be, as Tim referred to. I don't necessarily like tying our hope to the potential of ACA1 passing. It may, but it may not. If we wait until November and hope that ACA1 passes, and it doesn't, then we have another year to go before we can even start doing some of these projects. So that's a concern to me. And I think while no one ever wants to talk about it, I always like to think of a 2-election cycle for public entities to say, okay, if we lost on this election, when would be the next opportunity to do it? So for me, special election starts being something that I would want to consider, even though you may not be successful with it, or we may not be successful with it, but then we have a backup option in November. It's
We're not ready to make a firm recommendation.
we are not ready to make it. I want to look at more of the details. I want to arm wrestle with Tim on this. I want to, look at the projects that you're looking at stuff, but there are lots of things the point is, there's a lot of things to consider at this point in time. I think we are in agreement that March is too soon, that the March election is not the election that we want to be in. Partly because it comes back again to the plan. What is it in the plan? We've had a lot of community input. There's a lot of mixing and matching that we could do to create a plan that I think voters will support, but I think we need some time to do that, and a time, as Tim says, to educate people about the needs that you have. So all in all, I think it was a great poll, great analysis. We have some real clear direction to move forward, but we have a lot of work to do over the next month or so. And I think that's what I think we want to do, is to work together with staff to kind of say, okay, what could we do, and then tear it apart at the board level, and see what we can do. And also realizing we have had a lot of input from the public, both in terms of the surveys that were done and the great work that Michelle and you all are doing with these much smaller but more intimate meetings. And I think the public is probably appreciative of kind of the outreach that doesn't happen all the time. Tim?
Yes, sir.
Any other questions of either Tim or?
Well, I'll kick off. I don't mean to get hung up on verbs here, but when I see a project priority as renovate older facilities coming right up top, get a little troubled about whether the questions were asked right, because we don't want to renovate Winslow, and clearly, well, there doesn't seem to be support for renovating the old schoolhouse expressly. So is that meaning? I mean, what is the public trying to tell us with the question? Are they talking about this park? Are they talking about making our parks, be more beautiful? Putting in new trees, new turf. What does that word mean? What do you?
Yeah.
I'm
What does it
just
mean to
really
you?
puzzled.
Go ahead,
Go
Tim.
ahead, Tim.
I was to say that, the one thing, the fact that that comes up to the top of the list actually doesn't surprise me. Only I get to do this every day, and have done it for 20 plus years. Because the thing you find is that if voters are going to reach into their wallets and purses to do anything, it's to take care of the facilities they already have, right? And so when you say renovate older parks and recreation facilities to bring them up to date, that's really what they're saying. It's like, look, if we've got some tired parks, some playground equipment that maybe is a bit outdated, and we need to update that, or a facility that looks a little worn down, they would like to take care of that. And so it's, fresh and up to date. That's really what that item is about.
So the problem I guess I have with that is that we have these two properties that are probably better off being repurposed rather than renovated. But I'm not getting a sense of response from the survey about what people would like us to do with them.
They don't
Yeah.
want that in the bond.
Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
that's
think
pretty
schoolhouse,
clear.
yeah.
If we're talking about
Schoolhouse,
schoolhouse,
yeah.
don't put it in the bond.
But does that mean we can't repurpose it? Is there no?
Well, I think we need to develop a project list and figure out, we didn't test something like, what I was calling it, like, either repurpose or, redesign, the schoolhouse site, or, add new parks, and we didn't use those terminologies, so. Once we come up with a project list, we may need to go back out and do another public opinion survey with some targeted information, is my thought. I don't know what Tim and Larry think, but I think, they don't want us to renovate or to fix the schoolhouse, that's clear. But we have a piece of property that's underutilized that we need to do something with.
Right.
That and the Winslow Center. Didn't test the Winslow Center specifically. But
Yeah, when I looked at that, there were some real clear things. Those things we said were gonna be brand new, let's say a
Right.
gymnasium. Or, dealing with school, that there was not the support for that specifically. Tim's definition of renovation as taking care of facilities you already have is what people would like to see. And that's a broad statement. It's taking care of older facilities you have. Now, that doesn't mean to say you couldn't use money to do something at the Winslow Center, or do something, other kinds of things, but the specific projects like gymnasium and schoolhouse were not things that drove support.
We also tend to see, when you see a number like that on those lists, what it suggests to me, and I don't live in your community, it suggests to me, though, it's a bit of a lightning rod, right? That you probably have passion on one side and passion on the other side about, what do we do with this piece of property? And unfortunately, those are the kind of projects that you want to be very careful about putting into a bond project list that requires 2/3 consensus to pass, because you can't pass it on either way, right? And or you offend half your voters if it's in doing one way, or if it's proposed to do something else with it. And so sometimes it's better to kick that question down the line a little bit, separate it from your revenue measure, and say, look, we haven't made firm decisions there yet about what we're doing here. However, we do have all these other needs that we know we need to fund, right?
The other advantage
Let
of
me kind of go
these
at a different direction too, then. We started with this $96 million figure, which I think it's a choking number. It's really big. Bobby, that's what we used, I think, for the last bond measure.
No.
well, it's the same tax rate, so it's the same exact tax rate that we used,
Okay.
but our assessed value has increased so that much that it's a 98 million instead of 68.
Okay.
It's a
So.
$29 tax rate.
Okay, I like what you said about, now the step might be to make a list. Put some pricing next to it, and then add that column up and figure out if it's 48 million or 68 million or whatever it is.
Right.
This is what people are getting for it, and then maybe resurvey based on some more specifics.
Yeah.
Because I'm just feeling really adrift about about,
Yeah, and I-
particularly Winslow
Right,
or
yeah.
pickleball,
Right.
putting in new stuff, because it doesn't seem to be like,
Right.
like either we surveyed that or that we got.
Well, we were doing really generic,
supportive,
we were doing a lot of, kind of generic things to see what people would support,
Yeah.
which is what you do in an initial launch, see,
Right.
and so now we have a baseline. And so, so I think, as Tim said, this is a snapshot in time. We're gonna need to, like, if we're going next August, we're gonna need to do this public opinion poll in the spring. Because the economy is gonna be different, our project list should be solidified, and we can test some very specific things and see where we are. Before this board commits to putting it on so.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I mean, you're talking two different things. I mean, I think the project list is one thing, but my takeaway from this is that over 80% of the people polled said that renovate older parks and recreation facilities to bring them up to date are something they favor. What falls in that, I think, is we discussed, but that to me that's where I mean, those top handful of things are polled very highly. Especially if you look back to the previous poll that we had done, which I don't think was done nearly as well as this one. These are polling, I believe even higher than they did the previous one.
The other thing to keep in mind too, and is that as we try to develop a project list and try to be reasonable as we can on tax rate and total price tag. If ACA 1 passes, it does change your future a lot. So because in the future, I mean, you could go with smaller bonds, almost a minuscule tax rate and do other things. I mean, the ACA 1, while it may not be perfect to try to time it so we can do all of this in the future, if it does pass, it's going to be a game changer. So we don't have to pack everything into one initial bond measure, and I think that's exciting.
Well, that's an interesting perspective, because we had, I think, a mindset that we shouldn't piecemeal this, that we should find the things that people will support, put them in, and so long as it is the thing that we believe we need in order to, move forward with asking the
But let's say,
voters,
for example,
that's fine, but if
just
not,
the thing, let's not talk about schoolhouse for now. Let's say about gymnasium. In all the conversations I've had, gymnasium would be something that would be really valued here. But it really doesn't in this poll indicate that it would be helpful to pass it. But in the future, you may want to do that, and at 55%, you may be able to do it at a really small tax rate. So it is possible to be able to do additional things. But also, you also want to you don't want to start over designing and saying these are exactly the things that we're going to do here, because things may change, things may cost more. I'm a big pickleball player, but pickleball is controversial. You don't want to say, okay, we're going to put it here or we're going to put it here. All of a sudden you're developing potential opposition that you don't need. So there's a lot of work to be done before we get to that point. But I think this poll gives us some real clear direction: tax sensitivity, projects, and communication.
And thank you, Tim, for the very comprehensive opinion survey. I learned a lot about just some of the terminology and how this works. I think what struck me was the difference, at least the perceived difference between what we saw from the initial postcard survey, where we got over 1,000 responses, versus a very, with the methodology and a very focused opinion poll coming out with this list. So it's different, but and I know that Tim hit it in his recommendations. This tells me we really have to do some further community outreach, a lot of community outreach, a lot of education, depending on what we think that final list should be, even if it's something that's way down in the list currently shown on this poll, and then obviously polling again in the springtime. it's really an eye opener on how this works and how, if we don't do the education and the outreach, we're just not gonna hit that
Yeah.
66.
I'd also like to say, I think Tim, the no arguments were powerful.
Yeah.
And Tim will let them loose. I mean, you don't know, oftentimes you don't see that in polls, especially polls of public agencies. They don't go for the thing, but I think we took the best arguments we could come up with and voters got them. So I'm not sure 5 heavy arguments like that would be used against us. But they were strong, and I think it was appropriate here, so we know what and given all of that, we're like 60-some%. It's the support in this community for the Park and Rec District is strong. The challenge we have is a requirement of 2/3. That's he knows only too well, and you know only too well. That's the challenge. But that's what we gotta do.
Well, I think we have, some additional challenges, like one of the arguments that, could be for against the renovation is like, why aren't we already doing that? Why do you need a bond measure for renovating older facilities that should have been kept up all along? So I could see that coming up as a potential argument against a bond measure. And then I'm concerned too, the priorities that have been identified are, somewhat ambiguous, in nature. It's like renovate bathrooms, improve ADA. Some of these are even outside of our control, like the trail network. I mean, we can, improve the trails within our own facilities, but that doesn't necessarily connect them to other, trails and expand our network. And then nothing in the priorities help us to generate additional revenue at the end of the day. If we're not making a new facility or doing something along those lines, there's no additional revenue generation. The bond measures that have been, or all the projects that have been identified. So those are the challenges that I saw, that we've got some ambiguous projects that could help just improve or renovate older facilities versus very specific needs.
Great.
Yeah, thank you for doing the presentation, really appreciate it. When I saw this list of projects and improvements, I actually didn't distinguish the top and the bottom. To me, they were actually the same thing. But the top was, we allow people to imagine what that meant. What does it mean to renovate a recreation facility? Because in my mind, when I saw that, I said, well, we renovate Winslow. And I could imagine what I would like in it. And everybody could imagine what they would like in it. They said, and then they put their own biases and their own wants into that. When you put a project to it, Winslow, whatever, I'm sure if you do Winslow, I bet you'll be at the bottom as well too. And you say, this is what we're going to do. They said, well, that's not what I wanted to do. And then you won't support it. But I'm sort of of the mindset of just keep it general. People can project whatever they want into that. Because if you just keep it general, people want, the pickleballers will say, because we went to the Tice Valley, we could say, we can do pickleball inside. That's great. We can do a bunch of other things. I say, yeah, we can have a pickleball at Winslow Center. Or, we can say, because my wife was interested in, like, she said, oh, I want a swimming pool, indoor swimming pool. She answered the poll, that type of thing. But she projected herself, her wants and needs to it. And I think everybody would do that, right? So if you sort of project that, we can have a aspirational thing, a piece of property that's unused, the type of thing, and we can project onto it, and we can have a conversation. If we had the money, what we want, I think people will get behind that. But if you try to name it and be very specific, which will lose people because it's not there.
They can't visualize
They
it.
can't, yeah, it's not their thing, right? It's not my thing. I'm not a pickleballer, but it's an important thing for some groups of people, right? So to me, actually, it's actually the top and the bottom were exactly the same thing. And so I see it that way. But I was also sort of interested that this list is not that different from the master plan. So I'll just pull it up just now from like 4 years ago, right? I was just looking through it.
Trails.
Yeah, and like the number one thing, like trails, right? And then like these things, it's not that different, except that master plan led to measure A, which was a different emphasis, right? And actually it lost me a little bit, and I was probably one of the 5% that they lost, because the campaigning for it was so specific
Mhm.
that I can't picture myself supporting that. And I'm probably one of the top ones to say, well, I want to do trails and maybe some things, and I have my own projections of what that would be, but it was just so specific, you lost me, we lost a couple other people as well too. But if you kept it general, it's like, we could have done all this thing, I don't know. So, I'll pay a little bit extra, it'll be okay, type of thing.
But there's a problem with that too, which you
There's a little bit
probably
of a-
identify, which is.
So we shouldn't be-
People aren't going to agree with what we ultimately end up
Yeah, but
deciding.
I like what Larry said, we don't have, we shouldn't necessarily commit, I mean, we can kind of keep it more on a general side, I kind of see this as sort of. I think people want to support us, like you're saying, people support the parks in general, but if we get too specific. We're gonna start
Well,
losing.
you know, our job is to try to get you the money the most we can. And at some point in time, without necessarily tying your hands to all these specific projects, your job is gonna be making tough decisions about which projects go first, which ones you can do, design. The last thing we would wanna do is give people design of what we're gonna do. Then you're really getting into, well, that wasn't my vision.
Yeah,
Um,
not my thing.
so
We
That
had,
will
we
come.
had a citizens advisory committee that, or an oversight committee that looked at every nickel and made sure it was consistent with what we had promised the public we would be spending the money on. So that was sort of my reaction to having it be general, great. I love that idea because I agree with you. I think if we get too specific, not only do we handcuff ourselves, but we also lose people that don't want those specifics as well. So, your point's really well taken. Yeah. In Measure E, Larry, maybe, or Michelle, maybe were we able to offer seniors a deferral?
What do you mean?
no.
No.
You can't on a bond measure, you can on a partial tax,
But not on a bond measure, okay.
not legal.
Okay.
So on that note, kind of a segue, was there anything that stood out? I'm looking at the demographic breakdown. You can tell where the support is and where the numbers, I mean, I think that there's support all over, but where the numbers decline or increase. Is there anything in there that stood out? And that's one, and I don't know if that'll be answered, but the other one is I imagine that will be taken into consideration as we move forward and come up with, what the language and what projects, if any, are specifically are pulled out.
Well, Tim referred a little bit to that, double Republicans. Republicans that live with Republicans are a tough sell. Tim, but looking at the demographics, is there anything that you see that shoots out to you?
Yeah, give me a second here. I'm pulling up the more detailed breakdown. Sorry.
And I also, I don't know if we have access to the previous polling that had been done, and I don't know if they even did cross tabs or got this detailed in the information, but it might be curious to see since Measure E and since Measure A, how do these numbers compare? Now, I'm looking primarily on the age of the voters, and what those numbers.
Yeah.
So,
Seeing as how we had specific.
So there's a couple things that's interesting about your numbers here. Mainly that we're just not, we're seeing more similarity across subgroups in support levels than we might otherwise see. So for example, registration date, like how long they've lived in the community, ranges from support from, if you take your most recent registrants, people who registered to vote in the district since 2018, and then also those that register between June of 2012 and November of 2018, both those groups are at 71% support, right? So they're highly supportive. And then your June of 06 to June of 12 checks in at 68%. And then it's your before June of 2006. So you've got people who have almost, have been in registered to vote in the community approaching 20 years or more at this point, they check in about 63%. I was on a call earlier today where there was, that's less than a 10-point difference. I was on a call earlier today where that was closer to 25-point difference, right? So the people who lived in the community a long time, and as indicated by when they registered to vote, they were not having it, right? Whereas the newer residents were. Whether you got a child in the home or not, there's only a 3-point difference there. Even people who haven't visited a local park or recreation facility in the last 3 months checked in at 60%. Your age groups range from a low of 64, and that's your seniors in terms of support, to a high of 70%. That's your 18 to 29s. That also isn't, that's hardly a blip compared to what we're seeing in a lot of other districts where, particularly, I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm in this group, so I can comment on your 50 to 64-year-olds. They're a grumpy group of people. And I think what it is, if I had to add it up, they're not retired yet, right? And yet they're thinking about it and wanting to, and realizing how damn hard it's going to be, right? And so they're hypersensitive when it comes to tax measures. That group in your survey was right there at 65.2%. So, they're way out shooting what they normally do. And that's the whole point, is I keep going down this list, and I'm like, yes, we've got some problem people, and here's the real teller. Even your dual Republican households, right? These are those just challenging households. You've got 45% support from that group. And now, granted, that's a lot below 2/3, but I have done some polls lately where that group is like 25%, right? They just are not having it. Now, and so they're even more supportive than we might otherwise see. And by the way, there's only 5% of your voters are in dual Republican households. So they're not quite unicorns. You will see them now and again, right? But they're not very common in your district. So I think the striking thing here isn't the differences, it's the similarities.
When the opposition arguments came into play, that those numbers changed quite a bit.
I think
Okay. Yeah,
you see that all the time.
and maybe was that the percentage that Measure A lost by about 5% or so? 5%.
Just about 4, yeah, we got 61%.
Yeah, so that's about basically what, so odds of the opposition coming out again, losing, it sort of feels like it's very similar, that if the opposition, it could potentially knock off 4%, 5%.
As Tim mentioned, when you have organized opposition, it's always a challenge on a 2/3 election. So that's why ACA 1 has so much popularity among public entities, because it's possible at 55% to be able to withstand opposition. They can drop your support 8-9 points and you can still win.
Yeah,
Is there any early polling on ACA?
I wouldn't know. Tim, is there any early polling on ACA?
I have not seen it. And I asked that question, folks, and the answer I got was something like, they wouldn't have done this if they didn't have any polling suggesting it could work, right? And so, but that, I don't have any other specifics besides that, right? You have to think that they're going to write it favorably, whereas, and so they're going to write it in a way that you're probably best positioned to get a positive response.
I think the question is, what does it take to pass?
Yeah, what does ACA need to pass? ACA 1 need to pass, Tim?
50%.
Is it simple? It's 50. It's
You sure, Tim? I thought there was an amendment that made 55. I could be wrong.
Hold on, I
Well,
have to
I think-
double check that. There's also an ACA 13 and what that's designed to do is to take the BRT measure, the Business Roundtable measure, So what you basically have on the ballot is you have ACA 1 trying to make it easier to pass certain types of taxes. Then you have the business roundtable measure trying to make it harder to pass certain types of taxes. And I think you have ACA 13 that's going to try and make the BRT harder to pass.
Yeah, so I think the key is the why it's gonna need 55% is because of ACA 13, which is making it so that any tax measure that is anything that's gonna change a tax measure threshold needs the same amount of vote to pass. So if you want to make it harder, then you need if it's going to be 2/3 of the electorate, then you have to get 2/3 of the vote. So typically a constitutional amendment would probably be 51%, 50 plus 1%. But since this is setting a tax threshold at 55%, you're going to need 55% of the vote. Yeah.
By the way, I apologize. My headset does a really good job of like cutting out noise. And so if I'm talking, I don't get anything from you. So I apologize if I talk over somebody.
Okay, Larry, Michelle, what happens next? What are your recommendations to help us get to a decision about whether to move forward? Is that the next step?
Yeah, I think once you finish and you have one more of these community meetings. Want to take that information we've got from all the surveys, all this information, and then internally kind of develop a possible draft of something that we think you should consider as a possible measure. Now, again, you have plenty of opportunity to adjust it, change it. That's your role. But I think for us, it's kind of say, okay, what could we do? And I'll tell you what's going into it. Tax sensitivity, total amount of the bond, and projects. And let's
General
projects.
The things that give us the most opportunity
Do stuff.
to do things and the most flexibility with the money. And so to garner the most support, I think.
So we will come up with that and then have a conversation with you, probably a working session to kind of think about that. But we have plenty of time to be able to do that. But then, and I think along with that is we need to make some recommendations in terms of ongoing communications. We've had really good communications up to this point in time. We need to continue that. If there's building the awareness, as Tim described it.
Is it time to ask you to do a timeline for us? I mean, I think
You can ask that anytime.
the strong recommendation is not to look at March. So if we're not looking at March, then what should we be expecting in terms of what you need, when you need it? What's the planning process and all that? Should we be setting a time?
Yeah, we should do a timeline for both the special and November. We need to put down potential costs, challenges and opportunities in both of those elections and why. I think you need that. So we will do that.
Should we be asking you to consider possibly waiting until the following election?
Into 25.
Wait until we know what ACA wants. I'm just asking the question.
You
Should
could.
we be asking that? This data may be too stale by then. I realize that.
Yeah, I think his data will be still, but I think we should target, is the problem is that I don't think 2025 would necessarily work for us. Because I think we do need the high propensity voters, so you're basically kind of waiting 2 years, most likely.
Right.
Okay.
So
Thank you. Thank you.
So I think our target is August or November or both, depending on how we do in August. So but we'll come up with a timeline and then also some potential ballot.
And potential costs. There are
Costs,
costs in both elections.
It may, we haven't looked at the cost for us running our own special election, so that may be cost prohibitive, and we may decide not to do that just because of the cost. So we need to get that information.
Sandy.
And I know, Michelle, that this and Larry, this will come out in the timeline, but we talked about this before, but remind me how many months, when do we have to do something to determine the election date?
Yeah, so it's normally so it'll be December, January, it's normally 3 months ahead of time. So
Okay.
so basically The November election is usually in September, it need to be done by, and so the August election is in 3 months, it's about 3 months, so. It's a little less if there's not as many holidays, but yeah, it's about 3 months.
Thank you. All right, others? Eric?
Well, I just wanted to kind of circle back a little bit to the, initial question about the importance of issues, because I think part of developing a strategy to gain some additional support could be, how we tie Park and Rec to some of the other important issues, because, improving the quality of education is one of the functions that the Rec and Park District does. And we were at the Winslow Center and listening to the need for preschool. And that's, kind of an early start for a number of people that use our facilities. So improving facilities to be able to offer educational opportunities. And then, reducing crime and gang activity is, something that we provide services with our teen center, so if there's ways that, we can combine those, protecting the environment, increasing trails and access to people to get outdoors helps, improve the environment. I think there could even be some synergies there, when we link those to our overall strategy.
Thank you. Others?
I'm still hung up on a little bit on the opposition component. And I know there's a path forward, but that sort of final ballot with the knock off just worries me. I don't know if we talked about it enough because should it worry me? I'm saying,
Well, yeah, you should be cautious about it, but I don't think it should affect a decision. First off, every single person that took this survey got 5 heavy questions, or not questions, 5 heavy arguments to know everything. Now, in a normal election, you would have to have a well-funded opposition campaign to do that. It's more than just somebody writing an argument against it appears on the ballot. So, you want to be able to look at these things and say, okay, if somebody do the thing that I was encouraged about, yeah, it dropped it down, but the support was still significant with the best arguments that Tim and I could come up with. We ran the campaign against you.
And it only dropped 5%. We still were at over 60%. So, in that controlled environment. So I think, and that's something we're definitely gonna need to think about, but that shouldn't sway your decision at this point in time. And there is no decision, we're just bringing you back information. Obviously, if it came back that we didn't have any path forward, then we'd be having a different conversation.
Yeah, I just want to bring back to the point I made, the first conversation I had with you, to win a major, you need 3 things in balance. The plan. We now have direction on the plan. We can create a plan that I think you'll all feel good about, and I think the public will feel good about. But that's one thing. So whether it's a year before the election or a week before the election, voters are going to want to look at that plan. And connected with that plan, obviously, is a tax rate. But the plan is more important than the tax rate. Okay. Second thing is you've got to be able to communicate the plan to those people who vote. And there's differences. Tim will tell you, there's a different electorates in November of 2024 and a special election. But we've got whatever election we choose, we have to have the ability to communicate the plan to those people and anybody else we don't care about. We don't. Okay. The third piece is you need resources, to money and mostly people, to be able to communicate the plan to the people who actually vote. And that's a critical point. When you won your last major, you had a whole army of seniors on the phone and doing different things. We have to have our own army of people communicating the plan to the people likely to vote. Those things all have to be in balance, and we're not there yet, but we're getting closer. And we have to keep in mind that just writing a great measure, even if we had great poll results, if we don't have that community effort, Bobby will talk about that. The first conversation I had with Bobby, said, wow, we had a good measure, but we didn't have the support that we needed. We didn't have the time that we needed. 2 of the most valuable resources. So that's what we've got to do. And we have time to do it. We just have to do it. That's where work comes in.
yeah, follow up on that. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
What are the downsides then to having two elections near each other if we lose, say, the August?
No.
Is there a downside? I mean, it
I don't,
seems close.
the downside is emotional and ego. You know, that's what it is. No one wants to lose and
More like from the public perception. Yeah.
public looks at every measure independently at that period of time. They just do what's on the ballot right now. They don't think, well, did I vote for this before? And it also means if we lost in August, let's say, there may be some things that we want to modify. Because we don't want to necessarily go and say, we were right and you were wrong. And so we're doing it again. We may want to adjust it a little bit to do some different things to it that makes it a little bit different. But those are all farther down. But I don't think there's any real downside of going. You know, school districts used to do it all the time when they try to pass parcel taxes. They had to, you know, they had to go 2 or 3 times before they were successful. You need to know you have so much support in this community for what you're doing. They like what you're doing. We just have to not present something that they'll pay a little bit of money out of their pockets to do. And I think we can do it. I think it'd be more affordable.
Sadie.
I think it was important that the negative arguments were presented so that we can see what discussions we need to have, certainly in the near term and before we get, you know, to the point, just down the road, we need to have those discussions because we are going to have people who are supportive. They're supportive. We've got this, you know, this project list. They like this project over here and they'll support us on that project. But we have to be able to convince enough of those people to help us go out there and support the whole thing.
Yeah,
So
you were in the senior meeting.
Well, yes, I was, but also in other discussions with other people. And then it's just something, to me, the critical piece going forward is community outreach. And as we fine tune the project list, and because we want the public to say, you did listen to us.
Yep.
We don't want to get to a situation where we hear, you didn't listen to us. You took that off the list. We want this process to be where we did listen and we can explain why we did this and why we moved this and why this project, based on everything that we know, is not going to be there this time. And as you say, we maybe could do it later. It's going to be an interesting process.
Well, Tim, I think I speak for the entire board here that the net result of your excellent work here is confidence in it. Confidence that you've not only polled a significant number of our voters, but also you asked the right questions, that you posed challenges to them, and that the data that you got back for us is really valid, so that we can make a decision, you know, based on it, and also learn from it and move forward based on the data that you've given us. So, Larry, thank you for the introduction to Tim and his company. I think it's just been a great partnership so far.
Great, good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
You didn't let me down, Tim.
So Larry and I will get together and we'll come back to the board.
Good night, Tim. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks for joining us.
Take care.
We're gonna exit as well,
Okay.
unless you need me here with water.
Any other questions for Larry before he takes off? Okay.
It's with me.
Yeah.
Look
All right,
forward to
thank
next
you.
steps. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Melissa. Bye-bye. Well, this was actually a milestone meeting. Some of you may not realize it, but this really is something we have been targeting for about 9-10 months now to get to this point of being able to have confidence that, you know, we've got the data we need to make a decision, and we know what we need to do if we move forward, and we know why we wouldn't move forward if we don't.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think that's just been
yeah, it's a culmination of quite a bit of work to this point.
absolutely.
Yeah, I would just add, having gone through Measure A and been a part of it substantially, I'm unbelievably optimistic and confident and excited about what we saw here today.
Good. I'm glad to hear that from you, Bobby. That's strong words. Thank you. All right, well, I think we're going to close this item and move on to 6.2. I'm actually going to continue 6.2. I'm not prepared to make an oral recommendation this evening. Michelle and I have talked about scheduling one more closed session before our next meeting. Michelle, if you can coordinate that with everybody's schedule to make sure, probably just a half an hour would be more than enough. And then we would probably bring a final recommendation and amendment text to the board the second meeting in November.
Okay.
Okay. And Michelle has graciously agreed that that's fine. Thank you.
Clarification, November meetings, are they shifting?
They always shift to the first and the third in November and December.
Okay.
So that's on the published list.
Yeah, okay, just wanted.
Okay. Thank
First and
you.
the third Thursdays to avoid those holidays.
So we're gonna have like a next.
Next Thursday.
And I have failed to ask if we have had any written comments from the public or asked the audience if they had any questions. So I apologize for that. I'll reopen public comment for anything if anybody wishes.
We're good.
Okay, seeing none, it is now closed. Item 7, verbal report from committee chairs and opportunity to set meeting dates.
We went fast and furious in September and October, so we haven't had any right yet, and we're kind of in the middle. The only thing that's on the schedule is the district city liaison committee meeting is on November 14th.
We do have an ad hoc committee meeting
Oh, you have an ad hoc committee meeting, we did have that, so
next
Tuesday,
Monday, I believe. Tuesday, following.
Yeah.
And the time for that?
Yeah.
The time, we say 11, no.
It's at 11, yeah.
Thank you. Item 8, board announcements and requests to staff. Bobby, we'll start with you. How's that greatest high school in the world?
Yeah. Oh, good, yeah, good luck to the girls flag football team Saturday league tournaments. I think the way it works is they move on to the next tournament. So be exciting. First year. That's pretty cool.
Good
Yeah.
program. Anything else?
No, I really haven't been.
I'm
here.
just feeding you stuff here.
Yeah, thank you.
Derek.
I had participated in the listening sessions. I think it was really informative to kind of take a pulse on, what people had to say at those sessions. I really appreciate Michelle and facilitating those and, engaging the public and getting them to comment, in those meetings and pulling all that information together. I'm looking forward to the last one that we have here about, the open space and trails, given what we learned just now. And then looking forward to Haunted Trail. I'll be there and participating. I hope to maybe, if I have any time, pop over and check out the dance as well. But I think I'll be pretty well occupied with the booth that we'll have going on
Are you
there.
coming in costumes?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah?
yeah. We have a whole display, set up. So we putting that together.
Who's we?
The Gregory Gardens community crew.
Good.
Yeah, we've done it a
Good,
few
yeah.
times now, and so looking forward to being there again and having our presence. And then, participating in the special districts leadership summit. It was also for me as a new board member, I think very appropriate to attend. I got a lot of information and, certainly, things that I'll be, taking forward in upcoming board meetings and things of that nature.
We
I
are
think.
actually going to agendize brief reports. Maybe we'll each have 3-4 minutes to talk about the highlights and the things that stick out. Yeah.
I think, one thing that I will just say now is I'd like to see us, on our radar, looking at strategic plan. There was a whole bunch of discussion about, strategic plans. And I don't know, our last one was, 2019. I think it came up in 2020, and then the pandemic has really changed a lot, in terms of strategic plan. I wonder, maybe revisiting and updating that document as appropriate. So I don't know what cycle we kind of do that on, but I think it would be
I
timely
think
to,
that'd be great, part of your report.
yeah, to
what-
kind of
what the
consider,
specifics
yeah.
were. Yeah.
So, not necessarily a request, but just something that we, I think should have on our radar.
Thank you. Great.
Not too much. I'm also looking forward to Haunted Trail tomorrow. My daughter's looking forward to it, so we'll be there. Participated in the Special Districts Leadership Academy with other board members here and learned quite a bit. So we'll bring that back with a special report. Tough to pick just a few highlights in 3 minutes, but when we
Maybe
do
we can make it a little longer.
it,
A little longer.
yeah, I don't know, do a top, we can take a top 2 or whatever. Whatever, like, the packet was thick, so there's a lot of information that was there, but
It
definitely.
was described as the LA phone book. But I was able to tell them, no, that was only half. of it.
Yeah, that, I mean, not that much, but yeah, it was definitely a great experience. I'll just mention it because it won't be in the reports, that it was great just meeting other special districts and sort of placing us within that spectrum of how districts are run, and just feeling reassured how well we operate as a board and how well the staff do running the district, just seeing what everybody else does. And so- It's like, oh, that's what you do. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I said that a lot, but not if anyone's watching, not just bad about any special district or anything, but many have challenges, and it's nice to know that as a whole, from leadership down to staff, that we're doing a pretty darn good job. So that was did that. It was great to have that affirmation. So
We used to have a board member who was a staff member of a special district, and he was always amazed at how well this district board ran, because it was his observation of his, yes. Anyway. Well, good, that's a great observation, Clea. Thank you.
that's it for me.
Okay.
Can I say just one more thing? I forgot to mention, but hearing a compliment about your general manager from somebody else, who was in attendance there is, really, heartwarming to hear just how awesome your
Do you want to
GM.
give any attribution?
Yeah, so, what was that?
You want to identify the person?
Well, sure. It was, folks that are currently working with Michelle in terms of doing the
Capri?
energy, the energy solar.
Solar,
Yeah,
right.
they really appreciated how Michelle was helping to drive a solution. So just want to share that feedback that I had received, and I thought that was excellent to hear.
Awesome.
So.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Sandy?
Yeah, I was also one of the 4 of us who, we were there. Chair Bonato and I were there as second-year attendees. Our group was, I think the first day was probably maybe 40 plus people. And the first-year attendee room was huge, and I think there was 170 from what I understand.
Yeah.
So it was quite well attended. There were things, we'll get more information later, but it was nice to run into people that you might have seen last year and make new acquaintances from all the different special districts that were there. It was a good session. We got to go home a little earlier, which was fine. And I'll be curious to see how, as your brain starts to process all that information, it's just a lot. There are people who say, I'm exhausted after sitting there all day. I also attended, along with Tom, the Contra Costa Creek and Watershed Symposium that was at the community center. And when I say the community center, they used every room and nook and cranny that they could do. It was packed. There was a lot of diversity, not just in ethnicities, but in age groups that were there. There were students, and then on up to seniors plus that were involved in some kind of watershed creek activity. Our 3 folks from the Pleasant Hill group related to the creeks, were there, and I was at the same table with them. It was nice to see them. They were very appreciative that Tom and I were there. So it was a good session. It also provided a lot of information.
Was there information that you obtained that can help with our future project list?
Well, I did go to, there was a breakout session and one had to do specifically with follow the money. So I wanted to make sure I went to that to see if there was anything said there that could lead us to, some direction for possible grants or that kind of thing. I think.
Well, great. I hope that you and Tom will sit down with Michelle and brief her a bit on some of the things you
Yeah,
heard.
I've got to go back and check my notes on that. But it was really well done. And as far as the presentations today, one of the takeaways from the conference that we attended, we're going to get a chance to tell our story on this bond. And we need to figure out how to tell that story in different ways. I think that's going to be really important. So I'm looking forward to doing that.
Well, short and sweet, I too had the opportunity to attend the Special Districts Leadership Academy as a returning student and got a great deal out of it. Looking forward to making a report to everybody about some of the details. But I will second what Vice Chair Vincent had to say about one of the best things about it, and Kui also, I think you alluded to it as well, is just rubbing shoulders with people who do what we do. And learning from their experiences and asking, why did you run for your board and what are your challenges? And just having that opportunity to talk with other people was one of the best things. One of the best things about the program. So, all right, and with that, unless there's anything else, I will call this meeting closed at 8:45. Thank you.
I just want to say a quick thing this weekend, highlight that Rogers Main Court, the Harvest Festival
Yes.
from 10 to 2.